Hello, I'm Beth Rigby. I'm the political editor of Sky News, and it's my great pleasure to be here today to introduce you to someone that you probably have no idea who this man is. It's the Director General of the BBC, Tony Hall, who has hot-footed it from an interview with John Humphreys this morning. So after that grilling, I imagine this is going to be a walk in the park for you. But I think you've got an address for us, and then we're going to have a Q&A afterwards.
Great, thank you. I made it through it anyway. Hello, and I thought, as I'm kind of between you all and dinner and a drink, and it's been a long day, we might start off with something I think is rather special, and I hope you're going to enjoy. Just have a look at this.
Gentlemen, there is a war raging right now with the magisterium, between those trying to keep us in ignorance and those willing to fight for truth and freedom. Who will stand with me?
This kind of heresy is of the highest priority to the magisterium. I need to know where he's going and what he intends to achieve.
Gronk was packing up to leave.
You're not leaving!
I can't stay! The North is no place for a child.
Lyra, the Master has asked if I can find a place for you. And I want you as my assistant.
You're an explorer too, just like my uncle.
I can teach you to wield power, but you must let me mold you.
We believe there is an organization that is stealing children and taking them north.
Sometimes children can just disappear.
I promised to do everything I could to protect you from harm. This, it's an alethiometer. It is illegal unless approved by the magisterium.
What does it do?
It tells you the truth. She has to make a journey. One which I'm afraid includes a great betrayal.
Lyra? It's trying to warn me of something.
I suspect it's trying to warn you of everything.
He scores me. I can fight. And I can fly.
What question should we be asking you that we are not?
The Magisterium have muscle. I would ask where I could obtain the services of an armored bear.
Yorick Bernison. I'm ready to fight.
These people need our help, Yorick. Let's go give it.
How am I supposed to trust you when no one tells me the truth?
It's time.
I know.
So there we are. I have to say it's amazing, and going to watch it being shot on one day last year in the woods somewhere outside Cardiff. What really kind of struck me about it was the skills, the dedication, the confidence of the team, I mean, into realizing things like demons, which were going to be a real problem, but they were all committed, every single person, to doing something they really wanted to do, which is to make Pullman's extraordinary trilogy work. And that kind of pride and that commitment just was completely overwhelming. Anyway, we'll come back to that theme in a moment. But first, I want to take us back 40 years to a time before we learned words like value change, disintermediation, or indeed backstop. 40 years ago, in the late 70s, the renowned Harvard economist J.K. Galbraith published what was a masterpiece, The Age of Uncertainty. And in it, he argued that the economic and political certainties of a previous century had begun to dissolve. Financial crises, monetary shocks, the threat of conflict, the collapse of international trade were ushering in an era of change, unpredictability, and revolution. In this country, in Britain, this was the era of the three-day working week and bailouts from the International Monetary Fund. And in the US, it was the age of Watergate. And Galbraith expanded on his ideas in a 15-part BBC series first broadcast in 1977. And it caused a row. There were those who condemned the BBC for bias, so nothing new there. And of course, when you look at it now, it's very much of its time. But there's so much in it that resonates, I think, powerfully today. Because at this moment, it feels like we're altogether navigating our way through what is a new age of uncertainty, not with the benefit of hindsight, not comfortably through the rearview mirror, but in real time at full throttle with the windscreen painted over. Our country, I don't need to tell any of you, is at a pivotal moment in its history as it reshapes its relationship with the world. Convention, traditions we've held on to are being broken. Our highly open, globalized economy is facing trade wars. New technology is changing, or you might call it disrupting our world at an accelerating pace. Old alliances and common values are under strain, and propaganda and disinformation are rife. It can sometimes feel like an even earlier era of uncertainty, that of the 1920s. And that, of course, is the era that created the BBC. The BBC, we, exist as a response to that time of change. There was conflict, but there was opportunity too. We were set up to use the power of what was then the new mass media to shape culture and society for the better, to find a uniquely British way between the free market of the American media and the state control of the Soviet, we would now say Russian. We were there to bring the magic of broadcasting to all, the sower casting the seeds of virtue to take root wherever they may. And the BBC played an essential role in addressing many of those issues back then, and I believe the same is true today. In an age of uncertainty, we should be confident. An age of uncertainty is also an age of opportunity. For our audiences, the British media, the BBC, and public service broadcasting are more important than ever. And I want to say why. In an age of disinformation, propaganda, fakery, people want access to the truth, to trusted, accurate news at a time when the whole idea of trust and truth has never been more contested, when the false prophets of certainty want to feed us easy answers. Our job is to reflect our age of uncertainty as it is, being honest about what we don't know and acknowledging that we're uncertain too. Audiences also want storytelling that reflect their lives and their uncertainties. And if you look at the appeal of a series like Fleabag, and there are so many things you could say about it, but it's all about people saying, it's hard, I'm doing my best, I'm uncertain, and I'm trying to be who I think I could be. And perhaps that's why people relate to it. And for me, hot priests aside, Phoebe's series was brilliant at capturing the ambiguities of relationships, love, and commitment today. But there's a bigger picture here too. If, going forward, we get our storytelling right and harness the power and potential of British creativity, then we can help ensure that the UK is well placed to take the lead in the next economic revolution. Why? Because, and we all believe this, creativity, innovation, imagination, intangibles in the old accounting phrase are the new sources of value in the future and now. Across all parts of the economy, in all parts of the world, companies are creating huge businesses from assets you can neither see nor touch, in formats, in design, branding, R&D, data, software. These intangibles are increasingly the source of long-term success for companies and countries alike. And the UK has a huge advantage here. We are one of the world's most creative digital players. We have the power and potential to own and exploit an abundance of intellectual property. It's not as if we don't have the talent. We've always had it. I remember a few years ago chairing a panel for Radio 4 to pick 60 new Elizabethans. And what struck me was that the largest category of these 60, by far, were artists, playwrights, musicians, architects, and more. Basically, people who led the field in terms of their ideas and their creativity. And of course, at this moment, showcasing all this to the world is even more important. Right now, our country needs to amplify its voice, and the BBC is one of the key ways for the UK to do just that. We need the BBC and public sector broadcasting more broadly. We are one of the UK's most recognised brands. But being needed more than ever is not enough in itself. The world is littered with the remains of organisations whose ideas mattered but who failed to adapt. And the lessons of history are clear. And today, I would like to set out the key areas where the BBC will need to change to rise to this opportunity. And we'll be saying more about each of these over the coming months. But here's a flavour of what's to come. The transition into digital has taken a while. Let's call that the first wave of disruption, the rise of Netflix, Amazon, Spotify, market shapers that fundamentally changed audience behaviour. The second wave will see a new range of entrants entering an already crowded market. We saw it last week as Apple announced their new subscription service. Disney, Hulu, and others are to follow. And this, of course, is great for all of us, great for audiences, probably. The competition will be fierce. The libraries of many current players may shrink as other players pull their content to place them on their own services. The established streamers may need to fight harder to offer the value they currently give today. And the public, all of us, will be asked to subscribe to an array of streaming services, and they may not want them all. But I believe this is a huge opportunity for people like us. In this market, services that are distinctive and different will stand out. And two vital things, I believe, make us different. Firstly, we have a unique mission and purpose. All audiences, old and young, believe in it. Our surveys show that. And purpose and values matter today more than ever as people pick and choose services for all sorts of reasons, but for ethical reasons, belief in public service, as well as economic ones. Secondly, no one offers the diversity of content in so many genres as the BBC. We're not Netflix, we're not Spotify, we're not Apple News. They've got a job to do, and they do it really, really well. We're different. We can offer so much more, which means we can be a daily habit which tens of millions of people in this country value, but in a different way for each person. So how will we do that? We're already transforming iPlayer from a catch-up service into a destination in its own right. iPlayer will be the place you go to for your news, for your sport, the place you go to for drama, for documentaries, live channels, everything we do. So iPlayer is going to be total TV. It'll offer the very best of the BBC, all in one place, playing to our strengths, our liveness, the breadth of our genres and storytelling, the fact we're both local and also global. And I'm happy to say this is working already. In the space of a year, iPlayer's reach to young audiences is up by a third. Time spent with it is up across the board too. And that's before we roll out our full plans for extended availability and exclusive content. The same pattern is emerging for audio. A year on from the launch, BBC Sounds is reaching nearly 2 million users a week, and it's grown by a third in the last 2 months alone. And of course, these things take time. Sounds is more than radio, more than music, more than podcasts. It can combine speech and music, live radio, archive, new voices, new artists. And we're going to make Sounds a place to discover music, where people who love music inspire your passion for music too. And we want to add streams that showcase the full breadth of music that we offer. In the last year, we've had podcast hits with Peter Crouch, Forest 404, which is absolutely outstandingly good. Rachel Bland and her colleagues transformed the conversation around cancer. And of course, we've also had the wonderful, wonderful Brexit cast. And there's far more to come in the next few months, and we'll also be showcasing great podcasts made by others too. News, I don't need to tell you, is central to what the BBC offers. And I pay tribute to the extraordinary work done by our teams, like, for example, the 10 o'clock news, Newsnight, the Today programme, which will miss John enormously, and many, many other programmes which are necessary viewing and listening. And who would have thought that 2.5 million people we'd be watching BBC Parliament last week. When we launched it way back when, we always knew we had a sleeper hit on our hands. Its time would come. But as we all know, change is happening here too. Last week, the Reuters Institute pointed out that BBC News Online is more popular for young audiences than either YouTube or Facebook for news. And we've got to build on that. We'll help make society better if we do, helping people to understand what's happening, what matters and why, and, as important in a 24/7 news cycle, what are the long-term trends that shape our world? At no time is that more important than during elections. A general election with Brexit at its heart, I'm told one is rumoured, will be as challenging as any the BBC has reported on in my lifetime. And it will not mean reporting both sides of an argument. It will mean reporting all sides of the argument, right across the UK, so that our audiences fully understand what is at stake. And that will be an immense task. It'll be a bumpy road, it always is, but I am confident that we can demonstrate the BBC's unique value to democracy in what will be a very unique election, and to do that for everyone. The final area of significant change is local radio. Other local media is retreating, leaving great swathes of the country unserved, underreported, and without a voice. We need to grab the opportunity we have and root the BBC even more locally, and the opportunity has never been so great. I've always believed in local radio, and I want it to thrive, and we'll be announcing changes later this autumn. We have a lot of work to do, but let me be clear. This is about improving the clarity and quality of what we do across England. It's about being more local, not less, and giving a voice to communities who otherwise aren't being heard. We're going to create new models for local. We don't want one size fits all. We want to reflect people's identity and that very real sense of belonging we all feel for the area in which we live. I also want to build on what local radio was set up to do and focus still more on new talent. These islands are an extraordinary source of ideas and creativity. BBC Introducing, which is a local radio initiative, has just given us Lewis Capaldi as its latest discovery, following in the footsteps of Rag and Bone Man, Little Sims, George Ezra, Florence Welsh, Jake Bugg, and many, many others. And now I'm delighted we're rolling out something called BBC Upload, and that's going to do for speech what Introducing does for music. It's already live in Bristol and doing really, really well, and it'll be rolled out across local radio in January, giving storytellers, poets, writers, and new voices the chance to share their story and their talent. But I think the challenge of a fragmenting and a polarized country needs an even bigger response. And I want the BBC to be the organisation that is most fully embedded and distributed around the UK, that best reflects the different communities of the UK in all their richness and in all their diversity. And to do that, we need to understand how well we're doing. So we've been leading the way in transparency, collecting and publishing data about our workforce and our on-air talent, so we know we're doing well and where we need to do more. And that's why we published 25 pages of data about diversity in our annual report, far more than anyone else. But then we need to take action. Our 50-50 project has transformed the balance of men and women contributors across the BBC in a year. Radio 2's on-air lineup is now radically different. 20% of our highest profile presenters are now from BAME backgrounds. We're now one of this country's leading employers of non-graduate apprentices. Last year, we offered 350 apprenticeship and traineeship opportunities for the best young talent from the broadest of backgrounds. And we're doing much more in the key areas where we are behind: women, BAME leadership, for instance. But the biggest difference between the BBC and the UK as it is today is around geographical diversity. We've made enormous strides. A decade ago, a third of the BBC was based outside London and 2/3 was in London. Today, that balance is 50-50. We've moved from less than 10% of our network TV programmes produced in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland to 20%, from under 10 to 20%. But I want us to think bigger. Imagine a world in which the BBC moves still more out of London. And I think we could be really radical here. Now, I know all the risks. It would take time, it would cost money, it could be hugely disruptive. But what an enormous creative as well as operational opportunity. But as well as local, the BBC is also global. And in that lies a key to our future success. The world-beating Natural History Unit, based in Bristol. The global success of Doctor Who begins in Wales. Peaky Blinders introduces Birmingham and the West Midlands to a new global audience and is driving record tourism to the region as a result. Like the US, the UK is in a brilliant position where local tastes can become global hits. The question is, how do we stay successfully global amidst this new wave of competition? And I believe we'll do it by doing something different, by being the best people to tell the stories of the UK to the world, and by telling the world's stories to the world, but with distinctive British set of values. To thrive in this intensely competitive market and to unlock the BBC's global potential, we must find new funding partners, new strategic partners, a mixed model of public and commercial where each can deliver most value. Whatever we do globally helps us to do our job better in the UK, whether it's in drama or natural history or other genres, and perhaps our global role is most apparent in news. The new money the government put into the World Service has increased its audience by 13% in 1 year, and we should build on this. Already, 426 million people around the world choose us every week. 426 million. Actually, it's closer to 500 million if you include the UK as go I'm a journo, I'd like to go for the 500 million. But how can we get closer to 1 billion users a week by the end of the next decade? There's an enormous opportunity here which surely any government should recognise and invest in. I want the BBC to help make the UK a focal point as well for the fight back against disinformation and propaganda. And this summer, we brought together a number of media organisations, including social media platforms. And we've already agreed to cooperate in a number of ways. For instance, to reduce the impact of deliberate disinformation that threatens human life or the integrity of the democratic process, to make sure people are more fully informed during elections, to lead and support academic research on the impact of fake news, to work together to combat the threat of deepfakes or synthetic media. So, for instance, we learn how to authenticate video and detect manipulation. This is urgent and important work, and it's a priority for all of us. I began this afternoon by exploring the world of change and the uncertainty we're living through. And I hope I explained how I believe the BBC should respond and change. I know we can deliver change, because if you look at what we've delivered in the last couple of years, you can see we believe in change. We've launched BBC Studios as a commercial entity, merging it with BBC Worldwide and setting it on a path to success. We've invested more in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland than at any time in our history, and we've created a new TV channel for Scotland, now the most popular channel in Scotland outside the Big Five. We've invested an additional £34 million in what we offer children, including, just this week, launching a world-first, an app with real-time support for young people as they navigate the online world. We've bought and integrated the majority of UK TV into BBC Studios, and it's ahead of its commercial and audience metrics so far. Together with ITV, we've launched BritBox successfully outside the UK, and with Ofcom giving us the go-ahead today, that's great. It's coming here later this year too. And BritBox will be our key SVOD partner in the UK. It's going to be a great showcase for stories dreamed up, created, and told by British producers and British talent. We've delivered the biggest expansion of the World Service since the 1940s, offering independent, impartial, trusted news in countries and languages we've not been to before, and taking us to a record global reach. And behind the scenes, we've modernised pay, grading, our terms and conditions. We've driven diversity on and off the air with the most ambitious set of targets, I think, anywhere. We've made hundreds of millions of pounds of savings and brought overhead spend to a record low. So, change isn't new to us. We really have learned how to do it, and how we can do it against a background of greater financial stability. We've spent a year very carefully considering options for the over 75s, and the board, we have made a clear decision. We've carried out the agreement we had with the then Conservative government to the letter. But we recognise that increasing competition will require significant investment, and the cost of content in many of the key genres is rising much faster than UK inflation. So there'll still be some very tough choices ahead. But I have one final thought, and I hope it resonates with all of you. When all around you seems uncertain, unreliable, and shifting, we know that we reach for those who we trust and who we rely on, our most talented, trusted people. In all the uncertainty and confusion of the next decade in media, and in the world more generally, I hold on to this one truth, that any modern media organization needs to be a place where the most talented people want to come and work. In uncertain times, talent is everything, and everyone is talent. It's the essential precondition for success. So the final plank of our strategy must be to make the BBC the place where the most talented people do the work they are most remembered for. And we start with a great advantage. People want to join an organization that has a public purpose, a social purpose, and a clear mission. But we must continue to be the best attractor of new talent from all parts of the UK and from all fields of endeavour. We must be a leader when it comes to diversity of all kinds and give that talent on and off screen the best opportunities to grow and develop across platforms, media, geographies and technologies. We must be a global organisation that can make talent stars on the world stage. So, let's all spare a thought for the people gathering this Sunday evening at the Microsoft Theatre in Los Angeles for the Emmys. There are some seriously impressive British nominations, including more than 20 for the BBC. What a great showcase for our industry, for what we all do. So, whatever organisation you're from, to all the British talent taking part, the very best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. There's quite a lot in that speech, but I think before we get onto that, I have to ask you, what was it like saying goodbye to John Humphreys today?
It was actually very, very moving, very sad. I've known him for a very long time. If you can imagine, the cubicle, or the gallery, as it were, for the radio studio was just rammed. I mean, absolutely packed full of people, all of whom wanted to be there, producers and others, me. One of the producers had a baby there as well. It was absolutely wonderful. Trying to keep quiet enough so that the producers could get the programme out. And then, for the very end, after I'd done my bit and David Cameron had gone, every presenter of the Today programme that's extant just came in a kind of a circle to be conducted by Justin. Sue McGregor brought out PSB, the programme plan, as it were, where she'd written on things, on the first programme she did with John. And then I think John was, well, let's put it this way, extremely emotional at the end. And it was one of those moments where you think, there's a bit of history here and how we will miss him. What I was trying to do, because it was, you know, I went on because they asked me to go on and talk a little bit about the BBC, but also to kind of pay tribute to him, as he reminded me I worked for him some decades ago, so that had to be said. But what I was trying to get out of him was, when you listen to him reporting as the programme, and you listen to him reporting Aberfan, he was the first person into Aberfan and the tragedy of Aberfan, and I think that has given him that kind of, I'm going to quiz anybody in power, because, you know, the NCB and others, you know, got away with a lot then. And I think that somewhere in there, I tried to get him to talk about it, but he wouldn't. I'm not an interviewer, he is.
Well, talking about people in power, in the 32 years he's done that show, he's interviewed every single Prime Minister, but there's one who got away, and that's Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
He has not done the Today programme as Prime Minister. What do you make of the fact that Number 10 will not put up the Prime Minister on your flagship current affairs programme?
I think it is really important that people put themselves up, I mean, on Sky as well as on BBC, as well as on Channel 4, as well as ITV, for a long-form interview. I think proper scrutiny, it's all very well saying you can rely, as Trump does, for example, on Twitter or whatever it may be, putting people up for proper examination in a long-form interview is really, really important. And it was very interesting listening to David Cameron making exactly that point this morning, as Blair did when he was on about 7:30. I think these places where those in power can be quizzed at length, not just on the hop somewhere, you know, a grab moment, are absolutely key. And I think we should do everything we can to encourage politicians to come onto those programmes.
I mean, he hasn't yet done the Mars show. He hasn't done the Today programme. And Dorothy Byrne, in her McTaggart lecture over the summer, talked about the way in which television played a very important role in the democratic debate in our country, particularly now. And she talked about this dramatic fall in politicians holding themselves up to proper scrutiny on television. And I guess my question to you is, how can you fulfil your part of the bargain to hold power to account if those in power dodge your shows? What can you actually do about it apart from have a moan?
Well, we can have a moan. Dorothy
I like a moan.
I like a moan. Dorothy was very, very articulate about the issue, and I agree with you on the problem. But look, we've just started Andrew Neil coming back onto BBC Two once a week at 7 o'clock. Why? Because I think when you look through the various debates and so on over the campaign for the Tory leadership, and I think everybody did a very good job right across the board, which is great. But actually, the one place where you had a head-to-head forensic examination of the policies that each leader was putting forward, Jeremy and the now Prime Minister, was under Andrew Neil. And I think, you know, we've got to make a song and dance and say, you should come on these programmes. In the end, if they don't want to, well, of course, we've got a problem. But actually, I believe you can get others to come on and others to, you know, in the end, you've got to be part of that competition for getting your views across. And I think the long-form interview is one of the most important. You know, I would put, for an election, I would say, debates are fine, but actually the long-form interview is really important. I also think the point at which those seeking your vote meet the audience, you know, the question time format is really, really important too. You know, these are important parts of our democracy. So what do? You keep arguing for them and keep arguing for the importance of them.
And in your speech, you talked about the fight back against disinformation and propaganda. You said people wanted access to trusted, accurate news when trust and truth has never been more contested. And when it comes to this sort of phenomena of fall in trust in our institutions, the BBC is in the eye of the storm at the moment, isn't it? Do you worry about the growing aggression, not just towards the BBC as an institution, but also to some of your individual journalists? And I'm thinking about the wonderful Laura Koonsberg, who's been attacked over the past 24 hours. And what can you actually do about this to deal with this accusation of institutional bias?
Well, number one is to support your journalists, and I think that's really, really important. And Laura has my complete. I mean, I don't know how she does it. She's an extraordinary journalist. And when you see the top of the 10 o'clock news, and you see Laura and you see Katja, two women absolutely firing on all cylinders, that's the story you want to work away at. So what you do, I think, one is remind people the values that you stand for. I think as journalists, our newsrooms in the various places need to do more to explain what good journalism is and what it stands for and the pressures on journalism and the values we stand for. And I think the issue with the word impartiality is that out there it doesn't mean anything. So we've got to describe the journalism we believe in and talk about its importance and how we gather it. The third thing rather is, you know, we've also got to stand back. There's a huge amount of passion and noise out there. Evidence-based journalism is how we operate, don't we? You do, we do. We operate on the idea that we gather evidence and then put that before people. And I think that's getting even more difficult in a world where you see the polarization of I don't want to hear anything that I disagree with and vice versa. So our job is I think, to build trust by explaining our journalism and what we do, explaining the values and what we stand for, but above all, being the place that people go to find out what's actually going on. And when we look at our data, you know, people may not come to the BBC first, although many, many do. Actually, they'll come to us to find out actually what's happening, and that's important. By the way, we should be quite confident. You know, look at your audience figures for when you go over live to the House of Commons to explain what's going on, or there's some crisis. I mean, I mentioned BBC, but you know, loads of people are watching the streaming now from the Supreme Court. You know, we should have a confidence that we can make these things popular, but also there's a desire for knowledge out there.
there's a desire for knowledge. There's also a need, more than ever perhaps, to be more robust with our politicians and to call them out as well.
Yeah.
And this is another feature of Dorothy's lecture, McTaggart lecture. And in that lecture, and I'm going to quote this directly at you and see what you think, she posed this question. She said, is it time for us to start using the L word? I believe we need to start calling politicians out as liars when they lie. If we continue to be so polite, how will our viewers know that politicians are lying? What do you think of that?
Two things. One is, and it goes back to Humph, really, which is the well-briefed interview. The interviews which are not just about what's going to happen next, but actually are policy-driven interviews where people are held to account for what they're doing by people who know. This goes back to Andrew Neil, actually, who know absolutely what they're doing. Secondly, I'm a huge believer in, we've got something called reality check. Others have different things like that. I think our job is also to say, okay, how can X argue that and Y argue that? Do you know what? They might both be right or wrong, and we should call those things out and do that through something which is absolutely on behalf of our viewers and our listeners or our readers, and say, this is actually what's going on and this is the truth of it. And I think we all, you know, in an era of misinformation and spin, need to do that more, and in ways that our audiences find palpable. What's really interesting...
But how would you feel, though, if one of your presenters or your journalists interviewing someone said, sorry, you're a liar, that's just not true? Would that be too strong?
Personally, I wouldn't use the word lying. I'd say, no, hang on. As Andrew Neil does, if you watched his programme last night, he's saying, but hang on, this is not what you said. This is actually the evidence here. So presenting people with, you see, I think, with the evidence of what actually is happening, or where, as again, Andrew Marr did with Farage, was it 2-3 months ago, which said, but hold on, here's what you've said in the past, this is what you're saying now, you're denying you said that, but here's the evidence. So I go back to evidence-based journalism and holding people to account in an absolutely thorough way, and that is, and can I say, because I think you're suggesting this, what Dorothy's arguing, what I'm saying is, we need to do that more now than at almost any other time in our history, because there's just so much rubbish out there.
Okay, we've actually nearly run out of time, but I've got a couple more things to say. I always run over on interviews.
Okay.
It's, yeah, look,
you must be hellish to produce.
I am a hellish to produce. On the licence fee stuff, you said in the speech that you spent, this is your quote, a year very carefully considering the options to cover over 75s. We've made a clear decision. We've carried the agreement we had with the then Conservative government to the letter. And this is Mr. Johnson from August. The BBC received a settlement that was conditional upon paying TV licences for the over 75s. They should cough up. So is he lying?
No. That was asked by a Sun journalist.
I was on the plane when
you were on the plane coming back from Biarritz, so you know exactly how it happened. And one of the ministers in DCMS put out the line which they have been putting out, which is not that. I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. Look, you know, we had a difficult decision to make. The board spent an entire year consulting and coming up with it, and we've
so he got it wrong.
Decision. Yeah, I mean,
it wasn't conditional, was it, on paying the fee?
No, I mean, it is absolutely there in the record. John Whittingdale, Secretary of State at the time, Ed Davey said it, George Osborne said it, certainly to me. The people knew exactly what was going to happen. Why, otherwise, you know, just think about it for a second. Why would you give us, by Act of Parliament, the right to determine the over 75s?
Okay, and I'm going to ask you one more thing, because I know it's close to your heart, and it's about diversity, and you talked about it a bit in your speech, and Sharon White talked about this a lot yesterday. She talked about the need for broadcasters to redouble their efforts to attract more talented people. Do you feel that despite all the programmes you have put in place, that it's going too slowly in the BBC, and what would you like to really turbocharge in the next few years ahead of your centenary anniversary?
So I think Alex was mentioning that earlier on. I think leadership. I think it is, as she was suggesting, that kind of middle rank, how we work on that, and progression. This is why I set up, for women, BME and others, the idea of progression, how we move people through the organisation at a pace. I think that's really important. personally have also been worrying about social diversity for 15 years. When I was at the Opera House, I set up a whole scheme out at Thurrock. I set up a skills council to give apprenticeships to people who otherwise wouldn't come into performing arts, music, and allied areas. It was wonderful, actually, because it meant that every school kid in Thurrock, which if you know Thurrock, would never dream they would do anything around theatre or opera or ballet. And when I came back to the BBC, I wanted to apply the same logic and said, okay, so how do we get to 1% of our workforce as apprentices by the Charter in 2017? We actually got there within a year. We're now at over 2.5%. And I feel very, very strongly about this, because it's funny, when people use data and they say, well, of course, you know, lots of people at the BBC went to public school when in Manchester. Well, I went to a public school. Actually, my parents didn't pay, the council paid for that. Otherwise, I would not have gone to a very nice school, thank you very much. And I think, for me, I was lucky. Those things are not there in any quantity at the moment. And therefore, I really feel our mission to find talent wherever it may be. You know, maybe it's left school, gone and done nothing, and then suddenly it appears again. That is really important. And I think the BBC, because we're spread out around the UK, that's something I think we are in a great place to do, and I really want to make progress on that score.
Okay, well, thank you, Tony. I really have gone over my time.
We've crashed the pips.
I've crashed the pips. But look, thank you so much for your speech, and thank you for joining us today. And I think we'll give you a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks.